welcome everybody to this discussion of this very important writer, Friedrich Nietzsche. And you can see the dates, 1844 to 1900. That means that he's born right into the middle of the 19th century. So therefore, what he has to say and the books that he writes and the reactions and the very important things that he's published by his death in 1900 are all reactions to the extraordinary events of the 19th century. That is, the extraordinary changes, the extraordinary life that everyone in the 19th century is living. The 19th century is the most radical change that human beings have ever had to experience in the Western tradition. So we can go all the way back to the Greeks, and we can look at every single century. Even the barbarian invasions weren't as shocking as what people had to go through in less than 100 years from 1800 to 1900. And he is put right into the middle of that, and that's right there, 1844. So that's what matters, is what exactly was it and what was it like? And so the first thing is to realize that everyone growing up in the second quarter of the 19th century is reacting to the fall of Napoleon. The French Revolution and Napoleon is a quarter century of French history that changes every single country in Europe and beyond. And then, with Napoleon's fall in 1815 and exile and death in the 1820s, it takes until the 1830s for people to adjust. And when that quarter century plus is over, there's a general sort of catastrophic decline in hope for the future, because the French Revolution looked hopeful, then it was hijacked by a dictator, and then he invaded all of Europe and dragged all of Europe into a war. And so in the 1830s and the 40s, all of Europe is going through a kind of catastrophic decline. And then in the next decade or two, it goes through a total new change whereby it gains a new sense of hope and a new sense of commitment to industrial revolution and agricultural revolution. And so by the middle of the century, by 1850, all of Europe has had to adjust to a whole new situation. And that's what he is going to try to talk about and explain. Here are just the basic writings of the 5 books that I've put here on the screen. You can see The Birth of Tragedy, which is his first complete book, which is published in 1872, Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morals, Twilight of the Gods, and Thus Spake Zarathustra. Now, it's number 5. That's the most famous of all the books and gains him immense fame in the future of the into the 20th century. Why is he so important? Well, first of all, he's a Christian from a Christian family who turns against Christianity. So that's the first thing. And if you think about it, that's what the whole of the 19th century is going to go through. That's exactly what all of the societies and all of the churches and all of the different religions, they're going to go through exactly that same experience. And so this voice, who is silenced in 1900, is going to be the most distinct, the most specific, the most rebel against Christianity. He's going to say it very, very explicitly. Number 2, his field is the classics. He is a genius in Greek, in the Greek language, and he is going to publish a number of different books on that. And then he will turn on the essence of the classical tradition, that is Aristotle and Plato. So he's a classicist who turns against the Greeks. Then he's a German who leaves Germany and lives most of his adult life out of Germany. So in a sense, he's also going to turn against his Germanness. And then 4, he is a romantic, a wild, passionate romantic swept up into a Wagnerian circle of opera lovers and all of the philosophy that went with it, who turns against Wagner and turns against Romanticism. 4 of the major themes of the 19th century will be the targets of his rebellion. So you couldn't sum up more completely a rebellion than that in the 19th century. Now, among the many things that he says, and among the many books, the one that will echo down through the 20th and now into the 21st century is the quote, God is dead. And in that famous aphoristic line, he sums up his view, his look back into the 19th century. And of course, all of that is going to be carried into the 20th and the 21st. Now, people who have lived in the 20th and the 21st, who agree and celebrate that, have embraced him and celebrated him. But on the other side, people who don't agree and don't want to celebrate consider him very controversial. So we have on the one side a kind of prophet of a new secularism, and on the other we have the man who wrecked faith. So you couldn't have a more specific and a more clear-cut opposition than that. That's exactly what the 20th century has had to contend with for 100 years and now into the 21st century. From his point of view, he was looking back at his time at the 19th century, and he was looking back at the triumph of science and thinking that science had now disproved religion. And so if we think about 19th century science in the middle of the 19th century, we realize that by 1850 there was a kind of new religion. That was the religion of scientific progress and technological progress. And you see a list of some of the things that are going to come into use in the 19th century. You realize that by 1900, life for every single human being in the 19th century had completely changed. So first electric motor, 1829. The very term dinosaur, 1841. Now, why is that such an important date? Well, because it signals to you the very birth of real archaeology, which the roots of which are laid down in the 18th century. But now in the 19th century, you will have departments in universities that will set up whole new fields of archaeological study and will begin to write manuals and documents about how you would do archaeology, how you would go into the field, how you would do a dig, and how you would then scientifically determine the age of a particular city, of a particular town, or a particular house. So the very birth of real archaeology. The Bessemer process for steel, well, we know what steel is going to do. It's going to change the way buildings are built, the way cities are going to be built. And 1859, Darwin, Origin of the Species, is going to be a devastating blow to faith because, of course, Darwin is going to imply that we don't need the Bible anymore to tell us where people came from. We now know, and therefore Christian believers suddenly were shocked. What were they supposed to do with Darwinian evolution? The invention of dynamite, 1867. Edison invents the phonograph, 1877. Edison invents the light bulb, 79. Ferrari and Tesla introduce rotating magnetic field induction motor, 1888, and Marconi, 1896. And then in the latter section, medical breakthroughs. All during the 19th century, there will be major medical breakthroughs, including something as simple as proper hygiene in the birth of born babies, and suddenly the lives of the mothers and the babies will be saved. And so by 1900, population in Europe is going to go through the roof because all those babies are not dying and all those mothers are not dying. So between 1800 and 1900, every single aspect of modern life changes. And it seems to be changing because of science, because of scientific breakthroughs. And it seems, at first look, as if all the scientific breakthroughs are going to wreck religion, that we don't need religion anymore. And therefore, that's exactly what Nietzsche is going to address. If we just stop for 1 minute and remember the Crystal Palace in London in 1851, so mid-century, right in the middle of the 19th century, a kind of extraordinary celebration of science and technology. So they built in Hyde Park this beautiful Crystal Palace, glass and steel, and inside they put on a celebration of science and industry. And here's an inside look, 1 million square feet of exhibition space, and it took people days and days and days to visit it. Millions of people came from all over Europe to come in and see this demonstration of science and technology. Now, what were they celebrating? Well, they were celebrating the triumph of science and the triumph of technology in Western civilization. And so it shows you that in 1850, the general intellectual milieu in which young Nietzsche was growing up was a world in which science and technology was about to answer all questions about life. Every single problem that we had ever faced would be now solved. Here's the machine court. There's just a picture of what it looked like. Hundreds of machines being exhibited to people, spinning cotton, folding paper, purifying sugar, making envelopes, stirring chocolate, cutting stone, manufacturing metals, spikes, candles, grinding wheat, extracting oil from linseed, rolling, wrapping cigarettes, weighing gold, carbonating soda water, drawing blood. All of this was on display for all the millions of people who were coming to the exhibition to see exactly where Europe in 1850 stood. And the idea was, of course, it had never been so prosperous. It had never been so smart. It had never been so informed on every single aspect of life. And therefore, the myths and the idols of religion were no longer necessary. There's no better work of art to sum all of this up than Turner's Rain, Steam, Speed. There it is, Rain, Steam, Speed. That's in the National Gallery in London. And that one painting tells you what people in the middle of the 19th century were experiencing, because, of course, in 1850, trains were being built in all the nations of Europe. So from 1830 to 1860, every single nation in Europe installed huge train systems in just 10, 20 years, so that all of a sudden people could go from one place to the other at great speeds, not have to stop, and see the vision through the windows of the train as they moved at 50, 60 miles an hour. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. So everything changed, everything was different. And therefore, religious faith, religious interpretation of life was suddenly unnecessary. Why would we need to turn to religious stories to explain the world and how it came about if we now knew how to do everything? And that was the general optimistic attitude in Europe in 1850. Life was great. We could do anything we wanted. Now, consider the change by 1900, when Nietzsche dies.